I am Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Soucy.
And we're paranormal specialists who live in the most haunted city on earth, Savannah, Georgia. Every day is Halloween in our line of work, so join us as we spin true tales of haunts, murders, and disturbing Savannah history. I'm Madison.
I'm Chris.
And welcome to the most haunted city on earth. I mentioned the badge with the blood on it. Do you know much about the killer from South Carolina?
Todd Colehep?
Yes.
Yeah, he actually, well, I know the general things pertaining to the case. So he was caught in 2016. A lot of his early life, he is one of those cases that showed all of the signs, like he from an early childhood age just had really maladaptive traits and issues. He was abusing other kids, he was abusing and killing animals, and he was sent to like his grandmother's and his grandfather's, and then lived with his mom, and so he was all over the place. But he was finally caught in 2016, but he murdered, it was a string of people from Arizona basically to South Carolina, and caught in 2016 because his victim actually got away. He was one that would torture these people and keep them held captive for an extended amount of time. So Kayla Brown was the last victim, and she's the one that was able to escape and come forward and led to his arrest. So a lot of people, because it's such a regional case, actually come in because he was professionally a realtor, which technically he was not able to get his license. He just kind of slipped through the cracks, like a lot of criminals do, and they're missed. But anyways, he was he was intelligent, moderately intelligent enough to get his realtor license and go through, and he had all these properties, but he would have shipping containers or little dungeons, more or less.
Absolutely.
But anyway, so he was caught, and he's been arrested, but he was the one that actually left Amazon reviews to essentially murder weapons and things that he used from that for torturing people. Like, he left a review for a folding shovel. It was like, great shovel when you leave your real one at home and you have to bury a body. And it's like, and people thought he was joking.
It's like, ha, ha, ha.
It's like, haha, what a troll comment. But it's like, oh, no, like, this is real. And so all those reviews have been taken down, and all of that has been, used as later evidence. But I think that case is still pending and going to trial at some point in the very near future. But yeah, it's a whole federal case. And but because it's a regional, again, people are kind of familiar with it because it also is very recent. And some people even come in and they were like, yeah, my mom bought her house from him. Had his refrigerator magnet just hanging out at her house. And because these people, that's the thing. It's like, they're not going to be serial killers 100% of the time overtly. A lot of people, if they're going to get away with anything for any extended time, are able to blend in and hide in plain sight and, just be normal, quote unquote.
Oh, yeah.
But that's so blatant to leave Amazon reviews. But there's a lot of serial killers, though, that do things like that, where it's almost like it's thrilling for them to...
Yes, it's testing the limits of what they can get away with, for
Absolutely.
sure.
Zodiac killer letters.
Yeah. JT and I were just watching the new Hillside Strangler documentary on Peacock last night, and they were talking about how there were so many times where he could have been caught, but LAPD didn't do anything.
That happens so much. It's insane.
Yeah.
The Ramirez case, the Dahmer case. Jeffrey Dahmer, he was pulled over after victim number 1, who he picked up hitchhiking, killed him, didn't really expect to. It just got to that point, basically, and then he stuffed his body in a garbage bag and was going to drive it to the junkyard, or the dumpster, the city dump, but he was pulled over because he was driving drunk. And then the cop was like, what are you doing? And he was like, I'm going to go throw out some trash. And he was like, it's closed, it's 4 a.m, just go home. And that was it. And then he went on to, move up to Milwaukee and kill a bunch of other people and did horrible things.
Wasn't one of the victims literally ran off?
Yes, one of the
police picked him up and returned him.
Because it was a 14-year-old, and he was drugged and and there was something not right with him. And he was like 14 years old, ran out of Dahmer's house naked. And Dahmer was like, "Oh, that's just my boyfriend. We're having a bit of a fight. Yeah, that's all." And the police were like, "Okay, here you go." And then that is actually the victim that he later abducted his brother, actually. Yeah. Crazy.
So
Every case, not every single one, but there are so many cases where.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they literally had like you said with Richard Ramirez, they literally had the print of his super unique shoe. Like I think they said there was like only one set of these shoes that were sold in his area.
Yeah, in
his size.
West Coast.
Yeah.
It was the Avia shoe there were like 3 in the country or something.
Exactly.
It just wasn't a common thing.
Yeah,
and then
they had that, but they were like, "Oh, well."
Well, because the LAPD and the sheriff's department and like all these counties, they refuse to share information, and that still happens today.
Still to this day.
I mean, it's so, instead of all working together, like there's something going on here, and it's all seemingly connected. They're like, "This is our case." They're like, "No, this is my case," and they fight and don't share evidence and don't share information. And meanwhile, people are being killed.
Yes.
Yes. So it's like there should be a level of priority, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, while we're on the topic of serial killers, so Ryan, if you've heard us mention Ryan multiple times, that's Chloe's husband.
Yes.
But Ryan has collected such an extensive variety of artifacts from John Wayne Gacy.
Yeah.
How did he get so many of them, honestly?
So to put it to full scope it, he grew up around Chicago and was fascinated with the case since he was a kid. Also having an interest with horror, the parallel with Pennywise, that blew his mind as an 8-year-old. So anyways, so that was just a case that was fascinating to him. And then growing up with that really close in his area to where he was living, he actually ended up living in the same neighborhood that Gacy used to live in, called Norwood Park, which is in the suburbs of Chicago. And so anyways, it really left an impact on him when he was hearing all these stories, people that would go to the bar and have a drink every Wednesday with John, not even knowing. And there were so many stories that he was just fascinated and wanted to know more, because there were seemingly little bits of information that he would get just from talking to people. It's like, I didn't know that, didn't read it in that book, didn't hear about that on this documentary. This is interesting to hear personal stories. And so that really spiraled into reaching out to people that knew him, visited him back in the day. And with that information then kind of snowballed into, wow, there's actually a lot to this case that was more or less glossed over in the initial investigation. Again, with just being quick to close it, it left a lot of potential victims that were out there that he was never either tied to, or possibly they were never found. There's just a lot of lingering things. And that's why he was on death row for 15 years, because, all of these appeals were going through basically trying to point out hey, I don't think we have the full story here. It was less it wasn't like he was going to be free or get off of death row. It was more so we
need to close these cases.
Yeah.
Yes, there are. He even said, Gacy, when he was in prison and arrested, to all of his lawyers, he was like, "I'm surprised that the police didn't want to look at any of the other properties I built or renovated in Chicago, in Illinois, or out of state," because he traveled a ton for work.
And he was a prolific killer. It's insane. It was only a matter of 8 years of time, but it really ramped up between 76 and 78, I think.
Yeah, 76 or 78 was the peak of it.
Was that peak of it? And
72 to 75, there were 2 murders.
20 plus that we know of.
Right.
In 2 years?
Yeah.
That's an insane amount.
I know.
And he had so many allegations of sexual assault and coercion and that were never explored. That never made it anywhere.
I know.
He went to jail in the 60s.
Oh yeah, he was in
a rape charge or a sexual assault charge.
Yeah, he's actually assaulted a 17-year-old basically through the JCs, and it was the son of his campaign manager.
Oh, wow.
So anyways, and very higher up politically within the area of Waterloo, Iowa, which is where he was at. But he was sentenced for 10 years, got out within 18 months, because it was more of a men's reformatory. He was younger. He was in his mid-20s, and it was a first charge. So they were like, well, we see signs that you're gonna
Right.
not do terrible things
Well,
in
he
the
was
future.
always really
He was
good
very
socially.
charismatic. Oh yeah, he was. Yeah, and
Super
yes.
social. He made it pretty high in the JCs.
Absolutely, yeah.
Public, appearances, and
Yeah.
just a very personable person apparently.
Yes. So anyways, we've been actually working on a documentary about the whole case for the past 6 years, no joke.
Yeah.
Just because we started digging up, like started talking to his old lawyers and like appellate people that worked the case that were like, oh no, like there's definitely more to this. And there was actually, crazily enough, there was enough evidence to actually open the case to explore the fact that there were other people that knew what he was doing and helped in varying degrees over
Yeah.
the years. For instance, 6 victims went missing during a 72-hour period of him not even being in Illinois. That should have been enough to be like, okay, so there's
there's
some
an
other
accomplice,
influence,
yeah.
at least one. So anyways, that turned into just exploring that and actually, because we've been trying to like bring final closure basically, because we actually think that we can, just because of all the documents that we've obtained. We have every single PDM record, which has never been looked at in addition to all the other things that we have. So we're actually compiling like collections and evidence more or less and things from all these different sources, because this asshole spread out so much information because he was talking to so many people. So it's hard to actually find all this information, but we're making progress, which is good. And now we can actually see, okay, so he was in this small town renovating a pharmacy for this amount of time. Were there any missing people?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, too, Chicago they don't want to open this in any capacity.
Yeah.
Because this is done. This is done to them. They were like, no, we got the main person. We feel good about this, even though it's like there were a lot of victims also that have not come forward publicly, but they've come to us knowing what we do and what we're working on. They don't want to be named. They don't want to be interviewed. They're like, I think that it's valuable for you to know that this happened to me too, because I'm not the only one.
Right.
Because he didn't kill 100% of the people that he picked up. It was a very sexually motivated crime, and depending on the level of threat the victims posed to him, either outing him or telling people or changing the price if it was a sex work. It could be like his own little rules basically, and nobody. It's hard to follow, but there were a lot of surviving victims that were, let go, that they didn't want to come forward, and he was banking on the stigma of sexual assault perpetrated to males from males would not be reported because of the stigma and embarrassment.
Absolutely.
And he was unfortunately correct, because that's still happening, It's a crazy case. So there's a lot of depth, and that's the collection more or less is the byproduct of this research and talking to people, honestly.
Yeah.
Including his younger sister, who we're good friends with at this point. She's one of the sweetest people ever, but been through absolute hell. And there was this whole stigma with her,
of course.
right after this, she was given death threats, and her kids were threatened. It's like, we didn't know, what do you, expect? But
Well,
yeah.
And I remember Ryan mentioning too that there's certain time periods where John Wayne Gacy weighed too much to be able to
that
maneuver through the crawl space.
Right.
Because that crawl space was only so big, but he got really wide at one point.
Yes, no, he put on a lot of weight in the mid-70s during the peak of the crimes, but that's also when he moved in several employees. And there were 2 guys that, they testified and they admitted that they dug all the holes under the house. They said that they didn't know what they were doing, but they also...
of course.
They also lived with him. So, but no, that's the thing. And there was even, there was one victim that came forward that testified who was a survivor. He unfortunately passed away, I believe, in 2016, but he testified very briefly, but he mentioned, yes, I was taken hitchhiking, just talking to Gacy, and chloroformed, and then woke up in this house, was tortured for, doesn't know how long. The time he lost track of time, but he would be in and out of consciousness and wake up and see lights flickering on and off in other parts of the house, and people talking and having conversations in other rooms while he was being attacked by Gacy. And then he one time woke up to a different person standing in front of him while Gacy was still in the room. So it's like, that should have been a compelling, but that was not the focus of the trial.
No,
the trial was to be like, okay, Gacy was there, perfect.
Yeah.
That's all we need.
Sweep it under the rug. Get it done.
Yeah,
Right.
Again, it was not about bringing justice or actually bringing conclusions to it. It was putting a murder away, which that's a big part of it. We want to do that, but we also, like, everyone deserves to have closure. Because, like, there's just no doubt that there are other victims, so many other that,
and possible other perpetrators.
Yes, absolutely. Exactly. Yeah, there's at least three main ones rather that we've found, and then a handful of other people that maybe were just turning a blind eye, but like kind of looks like they were a little bit more close with John. So it's tricky, but again, and it's I wish that people did this back then, because all those people were alive back then, and a lot of them are dead now.
Sure.
So can't question dead people. It's effectively.
Well, I mean, in a theory, if you really wanted to, but that's just a joke. I mean, obviously, it is true. It takes a lot of effort to try to uncover these types of cases, especially with somebody who is so meticulous, like John Wayne Gacy. Yeah. He wasn't a disorganized serial killer for sure. I mean, there are plenty of disorganized serial killers, but everything with him was so methodical in just the way he ran his masked life and how he created this persona in the church. He created this persona over here, and everything was calculated so that way nobody would question him. Yeah. And even his kills were so calculated in the way that you said, you know, who he picked to kill, who he picked to release. Yeah. When
everything was intentional.
Exactly.
You know, there was and way overthought. And I mean, that really also speaks to like the mental state of some of these people. Like a lot will, you know, kind of, I'll notice some things and I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. But, you know, I didn't know this before. Like reading his logbook, he logged every single minute of every single day of his life in prison and before prison. Wow. It's like, I just for fun just tried to do that because I was like, I have a bad memory. I'm going to try to log every time I do something at work. I gave up after about an hour and 45 minutes because I was like, I hate this.
That's exhausting.
But it's exhausting because I was, but anyway, but he would write down like when he woke up, what he ate, who he mailed stuff to, if he showered, if he didn't shower, he would write down a time for some reason. It's just insane. But that does speak to the obsessive, compulsive, and controlling aspect of these people. And there are also other serial killers that do that same thing where they log different things, and that even like extends into potential hypographia, which is when you are, you know, a lot of schizophrenic people deal with that, where it's just like the compulsion to write, and that is also sometimes a result of traumatic brain injury. So all of these things they all come together, little pieces of the puzzle.
Well, and especially I believe he was an extremely narcissistic person too, and I think he really enjoyed watching and detailing everything that he did.
He loved controlling.
Yeah.
That's what he needed to feel. You know, a lot of these people are in the same kind of boat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's so like. Would you guys ever investigate the Gacy house if you ever got the opportunity? Would you ever try to?
So the house is actually destroyed. Oh. They tore it down, like they gutted it and then destroyed it. And then there was an empty plot of land for a little bit, and a new house is built over it. So there's a new house with a new number. It's technically on the same plot, but like, it's
That must have been a hard sell. I mean,
I would think so. But yeah.
I wonder, well, I'm sure just on the paranormal side of things, I'm sure that land has so much connected to it because it was the final burial ground for a lot of those boys.
Unceremonious burial ground.
Exactly.
A lot of unresolved.
I wonder if those people who are living there now, how much they might be dealing with and whatnot, because a lot of times we see spirits who come from traumatic events, and a lot of times it is from dying from a really traumatic death or, you know, even murder. A lot of times we still see them because sometimes it's hard for them to move on after something like that. So I wonder, I would love to talk to the people who live there, you know, and see what they've experienced throughout their time, or even the people who built the new house on top of it, if anything occurred. Because there's got to be something going on in that house outside of it.
Logically, you would think so.
You would
sure,
think
just
so.
With the weight of that whole case and the level of trauma.
I also find it interesting when people try to say serial killers are demonically possessed. I think that's always a fun topic to go into because a lot of times it's not the case. It usually comes up with the Amityville horror case, you know.
Sure.
You know, because he reported saying that there was some kind of like shadowy figure that was telling him to kill his family, and the dog was trying to tell him to kill his family, and the TV and all that stuff.
Right.
But a lot of people also lean to the schizophrenia side of things.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I always think it's interesting to dive into those concepts also.
Well, you got to figure that a lot of demonic stories of the, you know, in history were probably mental disorder.
Yeah. Oh,
stories,
absolutely.
you know, and so the fact that they kind of go hand in hand in a lot of instances is the idea of like casting out spirits from people who are, you know, having fits.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, we now know that the brain is an amazingly complex engine that has lots of compartments and can do amazing things, can change people's, you know, perception and identity, and these are all real things. And 100 years ago, that would have looked like a demonic possession. You know, certainly, you know, even as close as the mid 20th century, we did not understand those things, and we keep updating. We keep updating what we know about disorders and types of disorder because we're still learning. But that also doesn't exclude a supernatural element, which is something that we may not understand still.
Right.
That we may still have an answer that is far more technical and far more biological, but the remnants of it are amazing. People have stories. People talk about it all the time. They have these interesting encounters, and who knows what part of the brain is interacting with what stimulus.
Right, yeah. I mean, you see intuitive people all the time, so sometimes maybe those intuitive people have a mental disorder, you know?
There you go.
Yeah.
So, you know, and they are just connecting dots that look a different way than somebody that doesn't have, that's more like neurotypical.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's plenty of cases of exorcism where it was severe mental illness. The one woman from, I believe she was in Africa, Clara Germana Soleil.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, she had horrendous schizophrenia and various other mental illnesses, and they practically tortured that girl because they were trying to do these exorcisms on her because she was able to speak languages that she wasn't familiar with, and things of that nature. She was very violent towards some nuns and sort of things like that. And so every time they did exorcisms on her, she would get just horrendously tore up practically. And that was super common.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a big reason why when you are going to perform an exorcism, usually they're not allowed to start doing the rituals of it until it is without a shadow of a doubt not mental illness. They have to prove, which I think is a good thing nowadays.
Oh,
you
absolutely.
know?
Oh, yeah.
Well, and I think that there are instances where just on the merit of the ritual, it does help people who have mental fixations, that you have this ritual that is reinforcing a type of suppression. So they are actually engaging in a type of therapy rather than an exorcism. They're being given an option to hold an exterior force responsible for these sensations and address it that way. And so I think that there is probably some positive psychological elements to an exorcism ritual, provided you are not, you know, torturing the person, provided you're, you know, if you're utilizing faith and faith-based constructs, it can help a person to have something that they can turn to when they feel a certain way, when they have these certain sensations and feelings. That is, I believe, why prayer oftentimes works for people of who have both faith and, you know, any mental aberrations. They can turn to their faith, and it will help them at the very least mediate the sensations. So there's room for both at the table.
Yeah, yeah. Not all exorcisms that you see like in movies and stuff. It's usually not, you know, the sort of deal where they're thrashing and foaming at the mouth, and you know, like you've got 3 priests, you know, dousing you in holy water and searing the flesh with things like that. You're not always chained down, so it's
You're not puking pea soup.
Yes, exactly. It's like it definitely
It's exaggerated.
it's very exaggerated. Yeah.
Well, and in many cases of exorcism, it's very hyperacted. The person receiving the exorcism is actually likely to act out in a way that they think is appropriate. So, it feeds each other.
Yeah.
Definitely. They're like, oh, I'm supposed to thrash around. I'm supposed to kick and
Right. If I'm chained down, I'm going to try to get out.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. So it's
reactionary for sure.
It's very reactionary. Absolutely.
But so out of every artifact in the museum, what is your favorite artifact?
That's so hard to answer because I have such a love for all of these topics so deeply, and there's such a cool history with so many of them. Oh man, yeah, it's really we do have I'll narrow it down to like one of my favorite standout exhibits. On the true crime side of things is actually all of the stuff pertaining to the Ed Gein case, just because we didn't even know it existed. Because Gein was he was not a serial killer by, today's standards or the standards back then. He did kill 2 women, but he robbed graves and made things out of people. There is a lot of misconceptions and a lot steeped in folklore, like he didn't actually make a nipple belt or a lampshade, but he did make skullcap bowls and a wastebasket made out of flesh and kept women that he thought looked like or reminded him of his mom. So anyways, there's a lot to get into there, and we've actually, all of the stuff that comprises of the Gein case comes from the lead polygraph expert for the Wisconsin Crime Lab, who did every single interview with him. And so that is some really invaluable information-wise stuff. And we've been going through it, and we're able to we're archiving and working on preserving it because it's the only stuff left, because he was actually acquitted of most of the charges, all but 1 murder, which is insane. So that was just a quick way of getting done with the case so that nobody had to talk about it ever again, and the legal way of disposing of all of this crazy evidence that they were like, this is traumatic, let's destroy it.
Right.
Same town that burned his house down right before the auction that would have paid restitution and for a trial. So that shows where they're kind of
it's interesting because it's that
it is
Midwestern corridor of Wisconsin, Chicago, Illinois. There's quite a few serial killers,
cases,
and I blame the winters.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'm from the East Coast of Canada, so that
there you go.
Yeah, you either hibernate or apparently go crazy.
Apparently.
But no, that's one of my favorite exhibits, just because that's stuff that, again, should have technically been destroyed because it was never public record used in trial. A lot of it didn't make it to trial because of the acquittals. So that's one of the things that is in there that I can't believe that we have. And then, of course, the depth of the Gacy case, that whole thing is fascinating. And I really actually, through Ryan's collecting, developed a really, really soft spot for all the sideshow history, because I just didn't know that much about it before. It was always interesting, but seeing the lives of some of these people, and there's definitely 2 sides to the sideshow too, where it's a lot of the early first iteration of the sideshow in the Victorian era, it was a lot of exploitation and a lot of people that were forced into this because people had no clue what they were doing at all. They were like, a woman with a beard? Oh my gosh, this is crazy, And then with the downfall of the sideshow before the Great Depression, there was kind of a stagnant moment. And then with the resurgence, with the Ripley's Auditorium and the Chicago World's Fair, there was there was an importance placed on the performers and unique talents of them. Frida Pushnik was a little girl with she was born with no limbs because her mom had a botched appendectomy when she was pregnant. But her mom she encouraged her to do everything, just figure out how to do things however you do them. And so she lived very normally, and was one of the first demonstrations of, her lectures would be, hi, I'm Frida, I'm 9, and I won a certificate in penmanship, and this is how I write. And then people were like, oh, you actually are totally capable of all of these things. And it really made disabilities visible, I think, in a capacity, and paved the way for more positive things later in life.
Absolutely.
And it was also a community for a lot of these people who were persecuted to actually feel safe. And so that was just a total part of the sideshow that I just didn't really explore, but it's super powerful and really empowering and interesting for sure. Oh. Yeah, so I love that stuff.
Absolutely. Well, sideshow and circus has always and kind of like it felt like it started out as a place where they just send people who didn't belong. So like I think we've mentioned how there was one woman who was kidnapped by a Native American tribe or whatever, and she ended up getting raised with them, and they did the traditional tattooing of her face. But after she left the tribe, she had to go to the sideshow because she didn't belong in modern society.
Misfit kind of
exactly.
Status, and I mean there were even laws, like they were nicknamed ugly laws that were enacted from 1867 until 1974 in the U.S. 1974, but it prohibited if you were disfigured, maimed, or deformed, or it was the unsightly beggar ordinance is the correct term for it. But like, San Francisco's was if you were maimed, disfigured, deformed, you can't go out in public.
Go outside, yeah.
You can't go out in public.
That's very true.
The exception to that, so it was two options basically, hiding or sideshow.
Right.
And, and that was a lot of people's only way to actually have a life and go out in public and make money for themselves.
That's a forgotten element because people are very quick to be, it's very exploitive, and it was.
Yeah.
Don't get that wrong. But it was also opportunity that would not exist in any other realm because society was a monster. It absolutely shunned them. It absolutely kept them behind closed doors.
Yeah,
would not let them go to school. Would not let them get jobs. And now,
and now there are laws protecting people that,
them,
have disability and are, but it's,
that's
it
a
definitely.
Long haul, 1970s, good Lord.
I know, 74.
Seriously.
Yeah, they became unconstitutional by that point. It's like, that seems a little late, guys.
Right?
Late. But yeah, I mean, to be enacted in the first place is insane to me. But yeah, you would think that would be like, gone by 1906, but no.
It might have just been one of those forgotten laws.
I think
just
probably.
a law that nobody really thinks to,
Sure. Like actually pursue finding people. Yeah. I don't think it was, but the fact that it was on the books until that point is insane.
But it really is.
But yeah, it definitely is a whole thing that started out of like a fascination and exploitative kind of thing, and then shifted into like basically these totally normal people that could just shove like pins through their face or had an extra leg were like then exploiting you because you had to pay to look at them.
Right, exactly.
you know,
there's an empowering moment when they're like this,
and they're like the best, and some of them were like the best educated, like most well traveled, and like they even say they don't reflect on their sideshow days negatively. Like they loved what they did and they couldn't have imagined any other life because it just was what they liked doing, and there was definitely two sides of the coin, with everything.
Well, in human nature, we always have sought after the odd or the unusual or the morbid. Even back in like the 1700s, the morgues used to put bodies in the windows for people to come see. It was technically meant for, identifying bodies and things like that, especially over in England. Yeah. But people would gather because they wanted to see a dead body, which is so sick.
Yeah.
But, because it's funny, there was like so many books at that time, like in the Victorian era and the colonial periods and all that were banned because, this is literary material that shouldn't be consumed, but you can see a dead body in a window and we'll dress it up for you and things like that, which I think is so interesting about humans. And we still are kind of like that to this day.
Oh gosh, yeah.
But we just adapted it. Instead, we look at it on the internet or we
make our horror movies.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We watch documentaries. Yeah.
Or we watch our true crime.
Exactly. Yeah. And I feel like even with true crime too, it's especially in that because people want the even more gory details. There was a whole film series on actual deaths. I think you guys have
Faces of Death.
Faces of Death. I think you guys have it in your museum.
So we did an actual horror VHS exhibit for a couple Halloweens ago, and we resurrected basically like just talking about old VHS culture and like rental stuff. It sounds lame, but it was actually a really cool exhibit.
It was really cool.
It really fell flat with a lot of people. I would have like some 15-year-olds that came up to me. They're like, "Hey, what's the point of this?" And I'm like, "Well, you had to kind of, you should
had to be there.
Read the mission statement here. Read this. This does lay it out, but
Well,
I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, one of the most peculiar things, and something that is probably lost on the younger generation, is
Yeah.
there was a time when you had to seek this stuff out.
Yeah.
You had to work to get to
Yeah,
it.
it wasn't like-
It was not at your fingertips. You could not just look it up.
Yeah.
If you wanted to learn something, you had to go get a book. You oftentimes had to leave
Library.
your house and go somewhere else
Yeah.
and get the knowledge. And then you didn't even get to keep the knowledge, keep the
Yeah.
book. You borrowed it and gave it back. Or if you did buy a book, it was in your bookshelf.
Yeah.
And you'd have to like scroll through like old style. And and I think the VHS movement was such a fascinating time because the only hope you had of choosing your entertainment was the cover of a small box. And some of those VHS boxes, they would like put little lights in them and reliefs in them. And what I learned is the more interesting the VHS box, the worse the movie inside it was. Like if it made a noise, that movie was terrible.
Yeah.
But you'd love it. You're going to love it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's lighting up and
Right.
making noise.
Yeah.
Well, and the movie, you watch it and you're like, wow, these people are just having a great time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't care what the
Oh,
product
no, it's
is.
such
They're just having a great time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's totally just an era of just discovery based on like that one. I don't know. Don't know what it is.
Yeah.
You can't look it up on your
Right.
phone.
Yeah,
See
yeah,
who
there's
directed
no-
it. No, you have to like read it and
You
then
could carry the Leonard Maltin
Yeah.
review book.
Yeah.
yeah.
This says
Nobody.
1 star.
Or trust the opinion of the employee who's trying to rent it to you.
Never talked to the employees
Yeah.
at a video store in the 80s. They were always, and no offense to anybody who worked in a video store in the 80s, but where I was living, they were scary. the person behind the counter scared us.
You know,
and
they
so
were always kind of intimidating.
yeah, there's an intimidation
Yeah.
factor. It wasn't like they were like, monsters or anything. It was just
No.
like, can I
Like,
get
oh.
this? Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Rewind it.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Anyway, so yeah, totally an exhibit that fell flat, but a very interesting one. And in that, we did talk about the Faces of Death, and that was the dark web version of VHS, basically.
Yeah.
And it started as, it was supposed to be like a mockumentary, basically, where there was a bunch of fake stuff mixed in with a few real things. And then that turned into people's desire for seeing
Die-hard
all of this
fandoms, because
brutal stuff.
Oh,
And
yeah.
a whole series of
Yeah,
Faces
there
of
were like
Death. 4,
I
6?
think there were like 6
Oh,
or
God.
7 of them.
Oh, yeah, there's
there were
a
so
ton.
many. Yeah, no, there were a lot, and then there were other ones. Like there was, there were series that followed that in their footsteps for sure, and there was a whole exploitation, shock,
Sure.
gore.
And Faces of Death
kind
had
of
an
thing.
interesting approach because it was literally like face death, like people's perception of death and
The reality, yeah.
the idea behind it and how we treat it and how we both glamorize and avoid it. So there was at the very base of at least the first one,
Yeah.
a thread of philosophy
Sure.
to it.
Yeah, definitely.
And then it
then it
devolved
devolved.
into how
Gore porn.
realistically bad can this be,
Yeah.
and what footage is real and what footage isn't.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Hosted by that,
how brutal we can get with it, which I mean, nowadays it's called torture porn pretty much, with horror genre, but I feel like it's we've gotten our standards a little bit better nowadays with our horror, where we're not trying to see actual people dying.
Right.
We just like to watch
One would
our
hope.
yeah, we watch our Hostels and our things like, oh, you don't like Hostel?
Oh, blah, blah, blah. I'm a huge horror fan, like one of the tried and true horror fans. I'm not a gore fan, and more than that, I don't like watching people suffer. I guess would be the ultimate thing. I do not like any movie where there's an extended period of suffering.
Yeah.
You kill somebody, fine. You blow them up, okay. Tear their face off, whatever.
Yeah.
But if the person's begging, pleading, crying, if there's that element has always, ever since American Werewolf in London. Oh. I was 10 years old in a movie theater watching American Werewolf in London, because the ads for American Werewolf in London made it look like a comedy. I mean, it was John Landis. It was like, oh, he's a funny guy, funny.
Fun.
We went to the movie, and I'm with my parents, and the werewolf attacks. Griffin Dunn, the actor, gets attacked by a werewolf, and my mom covers my eyes. So all I can hear is a man screaming, and screaming for his life. And at 10 years old, this is how weird media is. At the age of 10, I had never heard a man scream. I've heard women scream that's what women did in movies. To hear a man scream for the first time really stuck with me because I couldn't imagine what was happening. And so in my imagination, it was the worst thing ever. You know, whatever was happening was the worst thing ever. And so, like, yeah, it was worse. Like, years later, I watched the movie, and he's screaming, but we're watching the guy running away. I thought we were, seeing the guy getting ripped apart, but we're watching the guy run away. Yeah. And, but yeah, it's indelible in my mind as something that I don't enjoy the concept of torture, suffering. And so Hostel was a weird one because they had scenes where it was like, this is a very prolonged amount of pain for a person to go through. Yeah. And I don't appreciate it.
Never watched.
A well-made movie, though.
Never watch a Serbian film, then.
I did.
Oh, no. Did you watch the uncut one? Oh, God.
Yes. I say I don't like these things, but that doesn't keep me from watching them. And do not watch the Serbian movie.
Don't do it.
Never in a million years. I literally watched it as again, it was a philosophical discussion with somebody who really pushed the notion that watching these movies is a way of kind of having an experiential catharsis. You're seeing something so extreme and so beyond your everyday existence that you actually elevate yourself out of the humdrum of life. And then I watched it and I was like, no, that was wrong.
Yeah, that's the most horrific film on the face of the earth.
That will damage you and change you, and you'll never be the same.
Yep, very true. Well, on that note, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. So we actually, at the end of this month, are going to be investigating the Graveface Museum. So make sure that you're following for that because it's going to be a really cool experience. We're going to be kicking off Graveface's paranormal ventures into the investigative world. So do you want to plug that?
Yeah. It's been kind of in the works for a while, but we've wanted to kind of get into some of the more haunted aspects of specifically Factors Walk, actually, and some of the things surrounding that area, but mostly just like a quick talk there and then leading you into the museum where we'll give a little tour around the museum, and then you'll just kind of be able to explore around at your own pace and get some equipment to see if there's anything that you pick up on and whatnot. But yeah, we've been trying to put that together for a little while, so it's finally moving forward and whatnot, and we hope to have that up and running sometime before October. So
yeah, right before spooky season. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, so we're super excited to do that. I love that building. I love the museum, so very excited to investigate some of those objects. Maybe we'll have the doll there.
Yeah.
And we'll see what's going on with that. But otherwise, please do follow us on TikTok and Instagram if you don't already. We are The Savannah Underground on TikTok and Just Savannah Underground on Instagram. Also, if you want to see more exclusive content, more investigations, merch, and things like that, please consider becoming a patron on our Patreon. You can find us at patreon.com/Savannah Underground. But Chris, do you have a ghost tip for us?
Yeah, don't watch the Serbian film. Don't do it.
I completely agree with that. But we will see you in another...
Wait, do you have a picture?
Oh, we do, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, plug it.
Oh, yeah. No, we have a Patreon as well. It's, if you just look up Graveface on Patreon, we'll pop up. We're the only Graveface on there. But yeah, we upload actually, we have a shirt club because we do all like screen printing, so we have that. But, benefits include Ryan unboxing stuff like pertaining to museum things. He talks about some of the releases on TerrorVision and stuff that he's working on and the like record label kind of side of things. And just updates on like when we opened the store in Chicago, we did like a whole walkthrough of that, and yeah, it just kind of keeps you up to date on everything really.
Absolutely.
But we have tiers as low as like $1. So yeah, it's just, just more of just where to see all the stuff that we don't put on social media.
Yeah, and their shirts are the best. Y'all have seen me wear a couple of them on this podcast. So, yeah, like the one JT's wearing.
Yeah.
This was
Wear
from...
this like every week.
Yeah.
I've seen you.
Yeah,
wearing
from
that
their
a few times.
Horror Miss event a couple years ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely become a patron of Graveface, become a patron of us if you are enjoying that kind of content. So with that being said, my name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And stay spooky, y'all.